Hi everybody! This video will demonstrate painting flowers in soft focus. It will be a painting with no hard edges. My old video called Soft Focus Watercolor Techniques taught all the basics of this soft focus approach, and it would still be the best place to start if you want to try this yourself. This new video will be a lot less formulaic than that early demonstration of pears, and you'll see me play my way through this one. It won't happen without some struggle. Even now this painting is not completed, and it may take a couple of extra videos to show you the finish. Here is what the painting looks like at the end of this particular video. Don't judge it too harshly because it's not done. Here are other finished samples of flowers painted in soft focus. This one was done as a live demonstration. It's good at showing the negative painting I was doing, painting away from each petal, not filling shapes. It was done with just 2 tubes of paint, and I recommend that as a way to practice this method. The negative painting is especially visible because I was leaving the flowers essentially white. This other example has a lot more color and complexity. It's a good example of mixing positive and negative painting. My 2 most important brushes for painting soft focus are the mop and the 5/8 inch flat brush. The flat needs to be springy, not limp when wet. I love this brush. If we had a fire, I'd go running to rescue it. I list these paints just because some of you will be curious. Make your own choices, of course. This is my source photo of Stella d'Oro lilies. I'm viewing them on a tablet while I paint and focusing in to enlarge chosen ones. First I'll paint one something like this. I don't have a master plan and I don't have a drawing. Not wanting the lily to be white, I start with some yellows as an underpainting. The paint goes on thick enough that it doesn't spread except as pushed around by my flat brush, and then I soften it with the mop. The paper is wet on both sides, and I intend to be working on damp, not shiny wet paper. My brush should be loaded with thick or nearly dry paint. Most of the moisture should come from the paper, and definitely not from the paint on the brush. I apply the paint very vigorously with the flat brush, but my touch is light when I'm using the mop. I mumble to myself while painting and use the term carve, since I feel like I am carving around a shape. In this case, I am carving around a petal with negative painting. As I proceed, I move on to carve around the perimeter of the rest of the lily. My working conditions for making videos are not the best. I hunch over a low table, using light from a sliding glass door on one side. I can't even see whether the paper has achieved the ideal state of dampness for this technique or not. My point is that the perfect state of dampness for the paper is less important than learning by experience how to come up with a workable combination of thick paint and various damp paper conditions. If the paint starts to flow on the paper is too wet and the combination is not right. Some paints are much runnier directly from the tube than others. Sometimes I'm using mostly old dried paint from the palette. All of this contributes to variations in the technique. Sometimes I mist the paper to keep it at a workable dampness. I seldom rinse the color out of my flat brush, but just keep picking up new paint. If, however, I want to change to a pure bright color that lives on a different side of the color wheel, I do rinse out the flat brush. Then before picking up the new paint color, I wipe out most of the water from the brush. I'm using negative painting to start creating these pistil stamen details. Being no biologist, vague and out of focus works for me. As I observe the division between another petal and the inside of the lily, I start to carve out an edge there too, but I end up needing to use gouache to make a correction. I decide to indicate a bud to the right and start out painting it with a positive shape. But before long, I switch mindsets to carve around its edge with negative painting. This first step has been sped up from about 30 minutes of actual painting time. I let the painting dry overnight before continuing, but blowing the painting thoroughly dry with a hairdryer is another option. Here is how it looks at this point. My mop has picked up color as it swooshed and softened, and it is dried to an unworkable stiffness. I will give it a nice shampoo and blow dry before using it again. And notice the strokes left on my palette as I pulled dry, thick paint from it. To start painting again, my paper needs to be damp. So off to the bathtub I go. I submerge the paper face up into about an inch of clean water and get the whole sheet wet, edge to edge, both back and front. I don't agitate the water unnecessarily. When I remove the paper, I hold it up by one corner and let the excess water run off. The paint stays put. Here are the two flowers I'm looking at painting next. First, I made a few changes to that first flower. You can always feel free to go back and make changes on parts of the painting you've done previously. I saw excess water on this part of the paper, so I dabbed it up with Kleenex. Then I started again with a yellow underpainting for my next two flowers. Unfortunately, I was interrupted during this phase, and all I got done was carving around the perimeter of these two linked flower shapes. Even so, it took me about 15 minutes. Notice that I'm softening with my hockey brush this time. Later I will adjust and change some parts of these shapes. I'm not seeking slavish accuracy to the photo. I will gladly make changes to improve an alignment that is boring, or make a shape more interesting or more understandable. That process will continue throughout all the steps of the painting. Because the edges are all so soft, I think revisions are easier to make than with hard-edged painting. Overnight, the paint has dried, and I'm ready to start again. First, the painting goes back to the bathtub. Now I will start defining the interior petal shapes in both of these flowers. I was not at all realistic with my paint colors on that first flower, but on these two flowers, I'm going to get even more playful. I just can't help it. This may take me into a very ugly phase, but I'm pretty confident I can pull this out in the end. As I mumble to myself, I'm talking about the shapes that I see and deciding which one is in front, which one is in back, the same old negative painting thoughts that I've mentioned so many times before. I'm also talking about pulling color from the inside of the flower out into the background and vice versa. By the time this phase is done, I do think it's rather ugly and things are so ill-defined that it's hard to stop right here. Without the flower centers and the pistils and stamens, it's really hard to read these two flowers. But if you reach a point like this, I hope you won't feel discouraged because it's just a matter of continuing and finding your way to say what these flowers are trying to tell us. Look how I just lowered the top edge of that middle flower. That seemed to help quite a bit. That is a change from the photograph, but a big improvement. Here we are back to dry paint on dry paper, and here we are back in the bathtub. I decided to try lifting with the narrow edge of my flat brush so that I could create some details in the centers of these flowers. I found the flat brush a little bit clunky, hard to turn corners, and I think if I had it to do over again, I might start with the Fritz scrubber instead. Back and forth I went with adding dark color and more lifting, but it never landed where I wanted to, even by the end of this step, and I still need to work on it. This little petal marked X seemed too small, so I lifted to make it bigger. And I did the same thing on the petal marked Y to make it bigger too. If you try this, I hope you'll enjoy lifting and reshaping as you work along. By this time, I pretty much decided that 3 blossoms will be it for this painting, but I added starts for 2 more buds up here, plus one of those dried out blossoms that has lost all of its oomph, and that's what I'm working on right there. Again, I let it dry, and then back to the tub again for the last time in this video. In this phase, I keep trying again and again to fix the center of this rightmost flower, and it never does happen. I'll be back. By accident, I mixed up a violet, kind of a dirty violet color, and I just end up loving it. I use it to re-emphasize the perimeter of this flower. And then I make sure to integrate it through other parts of the painting. I wouldn't want violet to show up in only one place. And one of the ways I'll analyze this painting again and again as I proceed is to look for colors repeated stepping across the page and values repeated stepping across the page. Now I've decided to take a painting break, and I will continue in the next video. I appreciate your thumbs up and hope to see you back in part 2.